And welcome back for another edition of the Dynasty Double Take, brought to you by DynastyLeagueFootball.com. My name is Dan Stanio. I'm here with my very good friend, Nathan Powell. Today, we are going to be talking about trade deadlines, aren't we, Nathan?
Oh, yeah. Getting trade line spicy.
So we hear a lot of talk about no trade deadlines, having a firm trade deadline to avoid collusion, all sorts of crazy things. So Nathan, what side of the fence do you fall on? Do you prefer to not have a trade deadline, or do you believe there should be one instituted within leagues?
First of all, I'd like to start off by saying I would just like all of my leagues to have the same rule. Like if I could choose one thing, it's like, okay, either they can all have trade deadlines or none of them have trade deadlines, because nothing is more frustrating than being like going to a league and thinking, oh, this doesn't have a trade deadline, and trying to make a trade. Oh, there's a trade deadline. So can we just make it universal, whether it's one way or the other? Let's try and universalize one of these rules.
We should vote on that. We should have the entire community should get together and we should just vote on that and figure out what exactly is standard.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll start off my case for trade deadlines just by saying the number one thing about it, and people say, oh, trade deadlines decrease activity. I would argue that it does the opposite. The fact that there's a deadline, it creates an urgency involved for teams to know, okay, I have to make a deal by this day. So the most, aside from, I'd say, rookie drafts, the most active time of the year is the trade deadline, with people making trades, trying to make themselves better for a playoff run, or trying to get rid of assets, trying to get a better draft pick down the stretch. So I think that with trade deadlines, the best part about them is that they do create an urgency and an activity at the deadline.
Well, yeah, they're definitely going to create that little bit of movement, and oftentimes it's kind of the week prior to. We don't really see like the deadline deals like the NBA or stuff like that. So I mean, it is nice that it adds that level of activity, but at the same time, we're doing this year round. We never, no days off. It's always dynasty season, and I don't see why we would shut ourselves off from the best part of our game just because. I understand why it's instituted in a lot of places, but I find myself playing in leagues with a lot of guys that A, I believe are truly very good owners, and B, I trust. And I don't see. So maybe it's hard for me to speak on it because I don't see those horrible trades that leading to collusion or whatever you want to call it. So for me, it's always just, why on earth would we have a trade deadline when everyone here understands how this works and no one would be making those horrible trades anyways? So for me, it's let's trade whenever we feel like. Let's have two irrelevant teams during the playoffs make a trade just because my leagues are going to be active. Your league should be active. Keep that trade deadline away. It should be non-existent. Let's trade whenever we feel like it.
Yeah, and one of my other points for trade deadlines is there's an element of kind of a dance with the girl that brought you. When you're in the middle of the playoffs, and then you trade 3 firsts for an AJ Green, or you trade, you make a big trade to acquire a player that's going to be scoring a lot of points that week. Certainly, obviously, everyone has the opportunity to make that trade, but I'd much rather just kind of, start the playoffs and we're like, okay, these are the rosters, these are the lineups. Whoever has the best lineup or whoever scores the most points during this time period, during this week, is going to be the one that becomes victorious. So I think that outside teams shouldn't really have an impact on the fantasy playoffs. And in talks of trade deadlines, I've seen people that have a week 12 trade deadline and then playoffs don't start until week 14. I don't like that. I think that's way too early. I think that the trade deadline should be like kickoff of like week 13, or maybe even kickoff of week 14. The way you can have trades right up until the playoffs starting.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to have that gap. You want those things to butt up, like you said. It creates that activity. But going back to your other point, the taking the girl to dance or whatever the hell you said. I enjoy the chaos of it. I enjoy seeing someone making a move right before they go to their championship game where they're leveraging their future to try to win now. I love that aspect of it because a lot of times teams that maybe aren't in the exact position to win are going to make a deadline deal because they don't want to destroy what their future assets may be. They don't want to give up all of those first. They don't want to give up all of their young players that they're trying to stash for the future so their team doesn't turn into just garbage. That doesn't happen with a trade deadline. When you have no trade deadline, we see big deals like that happen late, and it's so much fun just to watch the weight shift within a league. We see it in Kadoosh because you gifted somebody else the title yet again this season by gifting them Todd Gurley. So thanks for that one, Nathan. But that's part of it, and that's the fun, and I love the chaos. And maybe that's just because I'm a salamander, but still, it's so much more fun to have that built in when you just don't know what's going on around you, because we're not in everybody's ears all the time. We don't know who's talking to who and who's on the table and who's trying to sell what. It's fun just to kind of have that not knowing aspect of it.
Yeah, one of the other things that I like about the trade deadline is that going into the deadline and going into the playoffs, you kind of have to know what you expect of your own team. Just as an example, I have a series of best ball leagues that don't have in-season transactions. And so that trade deadline before week 1, there are transactions, and it's an honest projection of, okay, what is my team looking like? And obviously that's more of a broad example of, trying to figure out what your team looks like in week 1 is a lot different from seeing what your team looks like in week 13. But if you think, okay, I'm one piece away from a title in week 13, then that's the time to make the trade, not, oh, now it's week 16, I'm in the championship game, now let's add that piece. I think it's more intriguing if you have to make that self-evaluation and then make the trade earlier in the playoffs rather than, okay, this is just for this one game.
But we can watch teams destroy themselves that way too, because you may think your team is ready, but in all reality, that team's not ready. And now you are leveraging your future to get an asset that's supposed to help you win now. And maybe it is a superstar that's only 24 years old and is going to have a bunch of time left in them. But oftentimes those deals like that are for your aging wide receivers, your older running backs. And, those type of deals, you're overpaying for a title. When you're not, when you're thinking you're ready to go, you're still trying to pay market, but you can still wreck your team. You can go and get AJ Green at the deadline for 2 firsts or whatever it is, and he could have 3 stinkers, and now you have a 30-year-old wide receiver, and you're down 2 2019 firsts that created so much more value to your roster than an old wide receiver did. I'm not saying AJ Green doesn't have value or he's ruining your roster. It's just an example. If there's going to be that move, I want it to make one team ready and help one team truly rebuild. I don't want one team to get the future assets and then the other one to be put into limbo by making a bad deal because they don't understand how to put themselves in the correct spot, how to truly evaluate their team.
Yeah, and one of the things that I see from leagues that don't have trade deadlines, that it is an element I like when there isn't a trade deadline, is when you make a trade during the playoffs, you have to pay the following year's league fees, because that just simply prevents a team from, selling their first-round picks, selling their young players for a win-now asset, and then if they don't win the championship, saying, all right, well, I didn't win any money, I'm going to bail now. So if you're going to allow trading during the playoffs, I would highly suggest making a deposit for the future season be mandatory. So I think that is certainly something to look at if you aren't going to have a trade deadline.
Quick side note, along with your in the playoffs trades, making payments for future, along with that, trading future first. I require at least a half payment in all of my leagues if you trade your future first. Some of them are full payment, but most of them are just half payment. While we're on that topic, how do you feel about that?
As a commissioner, I wish I did that, but I don't because I'm too lazy. I don't want to be the guy who, as soon as you trade your future first, I have to say, all right, John, you dealt your first, so now you got to send me $25. Yes, it's probably the best way to do it, and obviously the well-run leagues like Safe Leagues and FFPC and things like that though in those leagues, those are mandatory and definitely something that if you want to have a well-run organization, that's the way to do it. But as a commissioner who has 18 different jobs during the playoffs, not exactly what I'd look to do.
Right. Yeah, that can add another wrinkle. But yeah, it is nice insurance to have, knowing that you're at least partially insulated for if someone does sell all their stuff and then bail on you. So there is that. Well, Mr. Powell, if you do you have any closing arguments for the trade deadline?
My closing argument for the trade deadline will be my first point. It just creates an urgency, and I think that urgency creates activity, and that's why you should have a trade deadline in your fantasy league.
And my counterpoint and original point is that does not create chaos. Allowing free-for-alls creates chaos, and let's make trades whenever we please. How do you feel about that?
I mean, like I play in leagues where that happens. So I mean, you win some, you lose some.
All right. Well, we got our points out. Some of us enjoy chaos. Some of us enjoy clarity. But for that, if you guys want, we greatly appreciate any reviews and 5 stars on the old iTunes. You can catch us. We'll get this out to your ears. Hopefully we'll see you soon. For Nathan and myself, we'll talk to you next week.
And for anyone interested, if you are a sponsor and want to sponsor this show, slide into our DMs at NPowellFF or at FF Dynasty Dan. We would greatly appreciate someone to pay us for this. Maybe I'll cut that out because that was a bit off-putting.
I don't know. It's kind of funny. Oh, and by the way, if you have money and would like to gift us some,